So dear friends, this in YouTube, this is a special session from Culture Studies Research Forum. We have a brilliant speaker here, Dr. Sherin BS. I welcome Dr. Sherin to this session. And Koel Banerjee, please introduce the speaker and start the session.
Sure. So good evening, ma'am and everyone. First of all, I heartily welcome you all to the 8th public lecture in 2024 organized by Cultural Studies Research Forum concerning the topic Contemporary Feminist Politics, Intervention and Counter Discourses. Before further proceeding, here is a brief introduction of our organization, CSRF. Launched on January 1st, 2022, CSRF is a student-driven non-profit committed to fostering free public lectures and thought-provoking discussion across various cultural studies and research areas. Our engaging talks aim to spark lively conversation and broaden our understanding of diverse culture and practices. Now let me introduce our esteemed resource person, Dr. Sherin B.S. Ma'am. A leading voice in feminist and cultural studies, Dr. Sherin B.S. Ma'am is a distinguished academic and a prominent figure in the fields of feminist and cultural studies. Currently serving as Associate Professor and the head of the Department of Comparative Literature and Indian Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, her scholarly pursuit have significantly contributed to the understanding of complex intersection of gender, religion, and society in India. With a keen interest in exploring the dynamics of secularism, religion, and gender in the Indian context, Dr. Sherin's research has delved deep into the lives of marginalized communities, particularly Muslim women. Her PhD dissertation, Islam and Women in Kerala, offers a pioneering analysis of the political agency of Muslim women in South India through a post-secular lens. A prolific writer and intellectual, Dr. Sherin's work is characterized by its interdisciplinary approach, engaging with diverse fields such as comparative studies, regional cinema, contemporary art, and urban studies. Her ability to bridge academic rigor with public intellectualism is evident in her contribution to popular journals and magazines. Recognized for her exceptional scholarship, Dr. Sherin has been awarded prestigious fellowship, including the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs Fellowship at the University of California and the British Academic Grant. Her most recent fellowship at Cambridge University further underscored her stature as a leading academic. Dr. Sherin's scholarly output includes the acclaimed monograph Gendering Minorities, Muslim Women, and the Politics of Modernity, which offers groundbreaking insights into the experience of Muslim women in contemporary India. Her book, Feminism, Deshyatha Prathi Bhavaharangalud Rashtriyam, explored the complexities of feminism and nationalism through a Malayalam lens. Today, we are privileged to have Dr. Sherin Ma'am with us to discuss contemporary feminist politics and intervention and counter discourses. Her talk promises to offer a rich and nuanced understanding of the evolving landscape of feminist activism in India and beyond. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction and also for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. Now, I know it's like, we're starting some 25 minutes late, but yeah, I apologize for the delay. Yeah, so when I was asked to give this particular talk, and right now, like as Kalyani was updating, I'm just thinking in terms of how to present or how to condense my thoughts on feminism at the contemporary moment in a kind of 1 hour talk. as somebody constantly engages with feminism as a category of intellectual investigation or academic investigation, and also as a category of life practice in terms of like living the life as a feminist. I also think these two are in some ways or in a lot uh, uh, lot many ways unnecessarily intertwined, in the sense like living the life as a feminist and also to take up feminism as an academic practice. These are not like exclusive categories. Therefore, like when I am or when I was asked to speak about feminism, or like when I was asked to choose a topic, in fact, I think I chose a topic. So when I was asked to choose a topic, I just thought maybe like, this is kind of an academic practice for me. But at the same time, it is also like Sarah Ahmed's book, Living a Feminist Life. All of us, we live feminist lives, men, women in contemporary societies. We all live feminist lives, and maybe this would be that kind of a personal sharing instance for me. But at the same time, like being in this academic practice for a long time and looking at feminist experiences, feminist theories, feminist methodology, it's also like, impossible for me to think about it just as a lifestyle, but it is also more than that. Like, it is something that evolves along with us. When I, for instance, started my PhD work some 20 years before or so, uh, more like I think it's more than 20 years. But yeah, so when I started thinking about feminism as an academic uh, field, this is not how I would think. This is not how I would think about feminism. At that point, feminism was something like textual knowledge for me. Feminism was a political ideology for me, but the kind of developments, the kind of ways in which we think about ourselves as feminists have changed over the years considerably. So I want to start the talk by referring to a particular book which I'm a lot interested in recently, which I'm like reading again and again. And every reading is like also taking me to different planes that I haven't thought about earlier. And this is Janet Haley's work, which is called uh, Split Decisions, How and Why to Take a Break from Feminism. Since you were telling me about the conversation you were having just before this, and the discussion on, is feminism an important practice anymore? Is it relevant anymore? I think this book has presented those kind of questions. The title is Split Decisions, How and Why to Take a Break from Feminism. So why do we think it is important to take a break from feminism? Is it so important that, have we kind of stumbled upon life's questions which cannot be explained, or women's experiences or gender experiences which cannot be explained through the single lens or focus of feminism? So when I try to explain why somebody like Janet Haley think about someone like her, why is it important for her to think like a non-feminist at a particular juncture in her life? Because she's also a practicing lawyer or a legal academic. She has been engaging with questions related to women, gender, oppression, marginality, all kinds of gender-related questions. And in academia, she had also, in this work also, she talks about that. She has served a lot as a member of gender sensitizing groups and what we call as the GS Cash, the internal complaints committee in our universities. She had been part of that. And still she says, if it sometimes, you know, the legal framework can fail you if you just look at questions single-handedly as a feminist. And so she talks about the impossibility of feminism as a category, as a singular category. So she says it is not like we don't live the life in contemporary world as feminists and non-feminists. We just live mixed lives. And earlier, for instance, like in maybe 10 years before, when I meet my students, especially undergrad students, I used to ask this question, how many of you are feminists here? And a lot of them would say, we are not feminists, we are humanists. And then I always used that opportunity to correct them, saying humanism is a loaded term, and humanism comes from the Enlightenment rational thinking and the conceptual framework of rights in 18th and 19th century Europe. And it is very problematic because that category also takes a lot of things for granted. It talks about, for instance, colonialism and a lot of other things. Even the question of gender, all these are like taken for granted in the Enlightenment concept. So therefore, a humanist or calling oneself a humanist could be a very problematic thing, I would tell them. And then I would explain to them, like, you know, what you mean by humanist at that point is contained in the word feminist now. And it is like, you know, there may be self-doubting, but at the same time, calling oneself a feminist is very important to be politically correct in a particular time. But these days, I myself come across a lot of, you know, reservations when I use the term feminism. Um, Feminism obviously has done a lot of good to women. There have been a lot of, like, you know, positive goals that feminism has set for women and achieved, and like as a way of living, as a political theory. There are so many good things attached to feminism. But at the same time, if we get back to what Janet Haley says, there are certain problematic Black areas in feminism. The repeated use of feminism, she uses terms like, for instance, um, um, there are like contemporary challenges to feminism, uses terms like feminism with blood in its hands, they would say, or would think about feminism as a very problematic, chaotic conundrum of a field full of, like, you know, confusion. So in that context, why, like, you know, this kind of a book, why this resentment to feminist ideology? That is the point from where I want to start. And definitely, like I remember again bringing out this particular intervention during one of during a recent talk where I tried to say feminism has become a very powerful ideology. And citing Janet Haley, I also said, like, feminism should be aware of its own power. When I say that, like, even in the Indian context, like, you think about any kind of representation, any kind of group, any kind of formation. These days, the first question we ask is, where is the woman? Where's the woman in this? And it is like, even as a token, it has become very important to give that representation to women, right? Recently, like, you would have come across this controversy when a popular film director said, okay, all these movies, Malayalam movies, the recent hit movies are good, but like, in some ways, women are absent there. And later she corrected it by saying it was not her idea, but somebody asked her and she said, yeah, it is good that people are asking these questions that about where are the women. So that itself shows this was not a kind of set question in the past. Now people ask this question, where are the women, like, why women are not here. So if you just think about feminism from that context, definitely feminism has become a very powerful political uh, category. And there are other things. And Janet Haley's, a lot of her issues with feminism, she enters it from sexually marginalized discourses, and tries to say that this is feminism cannot incorporate everything into its field. We'll come there later. But my contention is, like, when I definitely try to talk about the problematic field of feminism, one area for me, something like the women's question that was so crucial in the 80s and 90s, is it all that crucial now? Or is there this particular, we have made this category of women so nuanced, so again, like I would say, it's a very complex field. There is no category of women as such. In fact, we have, like, many kinds of many identities of women, and there is no one category of universal womanhood anymore, which was so important in the beginning of the feminist movement. So when you say you are taking a break from feminism, it also is to accept that feminism as a movement has been successful in some regards. In many ways, it had its own like awards and rewards. But at the same time, as a political field which would articulate one's rights, as a political field which would present an emancipatory method of feminism, is not just like, a battle. It is also an awareness, right? Like, that is, again, I'm trying to get back to Sara Ahmed's work, Living a Feminist Life, where Sara Ahmed also tries to say feminism cannot be just a bookish thing. It is also like, how do you live a feminist life in contemporary society? So feminism is also about a consciousness, a feminist consciousness available to women, but available to women in different ways. And for instance, like now, it is mostly acceptable or taken that there are as many feminisms in a room as there are, like, uh, 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 if we have, like, for instance, 100 women in a room, there are 100 kinds of feminism or 100 feminisms. So if you think in terms of a field that would recognize difference, if you think in terms of a field that would invite women to share their lives and talk about experiences across different age, race, class, caste, nationality, then this insubordination that they experience as women also differ. And you cannot say what is right for one woman is right for another person. So in that sense, this universal idea of feminism no longer exists. And probably that is one way in which we can rethink feminism. And this is like not a new thing. Like since 90s or like since 80s, Black women have been taking this position that Black feminism is different. And by 90s, we have Talpade Mohindi saying third world women experiences are different. And all those reworking on colonial modernity by feminist historians, they also try to present the problematic terrain of women's rights debates that happened in early 20th century in India. For instance, Lata Mani's work on Sati, she also brings out the colonial governance and its interest in engaging with the customary practices in India, which resulted in kind of the ban on sati. Or somebody like Ram Mohan Roy and a lot of other social reformers. Now we all know that field of women's rights, discourses on women's rights was not just about women's rights. It was also about reworking on the idea of tradition, family, etc., so that gender is inserted into the context of nation through the reformist angle from a male perspective. Why was it important for all these educated men to talk about women's education, women's liberation? And Partha Chatterjee asked this question rightly: how did all the women's questions suddenly disappear from the social context early 20th century? Was it because suddenly all Indian women got liberated, or was it because of something? So now, the idea of women's rights, which were placed in certain historical contexts, now, like, when we revisit them, we also see the social playing into that question of women's rights in different ways. How questions of age, race, class, etc., get linked into this context. So therefore, like, what I'm trying to say is feminism as a category has become quite problematic now. Understanding it is not just about understanding certain commonalities in terms of rights. It is more about acknowledging differences these days. And but the problem is, certain kinds of universal formations are necessary when we talk in terms of women's rights in the context of law, for instance. We cannot map differences into the field of law because, we talk in terms of universalizing certain things when it comes to legal initiatives. Something related to, for instance, can somebody take into consideration how do you translate the idea of difference into the legal framework? One example I want to bring in here is the question of reproductive rights, for instance. Like, women's rights over their bodies has been one thing that feminism had taken up, and it has been there in the field of feminism for a long time. So how do we engage with the question of reproductive rights? On one side, we are so much into this concept of women having control over their bodies. The idea of contraceptives, for instance. If you remember, for some of us who grew up in 80s and 90s in schools and colleges, we know that the national media used to give a lot of advertisements on questions on contraceptives. Like the government distributed contraceptives, they used to be pills, what you say as birth control pills, and they were projected as the ideal way to ensure that you have a happy family because you don't have to have many kids. You can, still have sex or enjoy sex, and then control the idea of giving birth to children. So this whole concept of distributing pills through government mechanisms was taken as a very basic mission of the healthcare workers in countries like India, where population still was a major issue. Population was a major issue. But the thing is, later, when a lot of feminists started looking into this field, they felt that it is a very complex set of, they could find a complex set of questions coming out there. Primarily, these were all like the WHO sponsored, international health organizations used to sponsor, and and these the pharmaceutical companies who were handing over these to third world countries, they all were operating from very problematic terrains. These were not things that they would distribute in first world countries. These were things specifically meant to, or like, or meant to be distributed in places like India and other countries which were developing, which were like not so advanced in terms of thinking about rights or thinking about bodies or thinking even in terms of the question of impact on human bodies, like the impact of these birth control pills on women's bodies. So now the thing is, this question of reproductive rights, which were so crucial to feminism, which was ensured through the distribution of these pills, were also done in a way like, by exploiting the peculiar situations existing in these countries. And there is also this documentary that Deepa Dhanraj has made, which is called Something Like a War. And in that, again, like she talks about this mass tubectomies which were done on on women in Indian villages, like in very, very unhealthy situations. They were like led to school compounds or local government buildings, and were brought in like cattle, and like, they were the surgeries were performed on the bodies of these women. And it in some ways, like, all these were done in the name of feminism, in the sense like, okay, birth control, women getting rights over their bodies, but at the cost of what? At the cost of, like, these kind of surgeries. And during such things, there will be a lot of negligence regarding post-operative care, the way in which this was conducted in school buildings, and unhealthy situations. Nobody was worried about that. The performance of the surgery became the crucial aspect for feminism. And same as the case with a lot of other things. So in the name of women's rights, a lot of, confused, a lot of problematic things happen. Which when we investigate, we also see it as a very, very murky kind of situation. So that is why, like, when we think in terms of women's rights, we are also quite concerned. Why is it not about women's rights? There is something else happening there. And one of the recent works that I read, which also I found very interesting, is a book called Femo-Nationalism. Uh, Feminism and nationalism. She brings up a portmanteau term combining these two words, and she calls it Femo-Nationalism. The author is Sarah Faris. And in femo-nationalism, Sarah Faris says women's rights have been used in all kinds of places. It has become a context in which you can bring in any kind of exploitation if you're doing it under women's rights. And she has done her field work in the field of among refugee women in Norway. The mass migration from the unrest in Central Asia, primarily created by the Western forces. And like during this, you also know the debates happening in Europe related to the whole questions of refugee. Now the thing is, she says there is a way in which right-wing nationalism and feminism and the left politics collude their interests when it comes to when it comes to the question of the refugee crisis. And they say feminism is used there to kind of check this refugee inflow, or in some ways to put a kind of surveillance, to put a kind of what you call, to make a statement, a judgmental statement on the refugees. yeah, she says she particularly looks at the aspect of care work, and she feels that among the refugee women, especially so her field was Norway. So she says in Norway, what happens is there are a large number of labor force in the field of refugees. In Norway, a large amount of this labor force come from in care work. It comes from the refugee women, and they work in childcare. They are they work as maids in many of these houses. They also work in geriatric care. So this care work is it has become synonymous with refugee women in Norway, she says. At the same time, there is also this popular notion of men, refugee men, as violent, as brutal, as not feminist enough, as men who oppress women. So there is a kind of a logic that works here. So this larger feminist concern about refugee women and their wellness and their rights, she says it is always oriented towards the refugee men. They would say, you men are, this is typical of what Spivak called the white man's burden of saving the brown woman from the brown man. Something similar. So you have these many women here who are suffering, who are oppressed by patriarchy in their own religious circumstances, and they need to be saved from these men. So, and now when you see moves to legalize this whole idea of care work and legalize in certain ways, for instance, there have been discussions in the West about not letting a family visa for women who work in the care work. They can come work and maybe send home money, but they cannot bring. It has not been legalized yet, but the discussions are happening. And this is about we want you for care work because we are not interested in doing that anymore. But we don't want your men and your children here because your men are bad and they oppress you and they beat you up and they are not feminist enough. So here Sarah Faris says feminism is again used to, in some ways, justify the right-wing nationalist aspirations to keep away a particular set of refugees, and in some ways they also try to ostracize communities, try to say they, as a community, they don't fit in Europe, but we want these women in the care industry. Therefore, we will present ourselves as saviors of. So there she says feminism, left and right-wing aspirations, they all collude in certain ways. And while when this whole triple talaq discussion happened in India, or now when we have uniform civil code discussions, this is one concern that keeps coming up. There's about interest in certain categories of women, it and excluding the men of that category from these discussions on right. Is feminism twisting its ways to kind of decide for communities, to kind of marginalize certain communities? So feminism has also become a very powerful weapon. That is what this book tries to say. And this is not just about the question of communities and religious practices. I also want to point out other terrains, other domains where this discussion has come up. And one is the field of debates and discussions on homosexual rights. So we have this whole idea of what you call is the pink nationalism or the pink nation, where certain nations, even though they are thought of as the violators of human rights of the basic form. There are countries, I don't want to name names, but you can look up what are the countries that claim to be pink nations these days, or like, what is this whole idea of pink nationalism? They would say like we are very friendly to homosexuals and we are very friendly when it comes to gay rights, but we don't mind killing people of other religions, people of other countries in certain ways. I mean, like they don't say that, but from their action, it's very evident they don't think about human rights universally, but there is some overt interest in talking about the rights of homosexuals in certain parts of the world. Jasbir Puar's work, for instance, homo nationalism, she talks about this, like how the idea of homosexual rights itself is used to pit against, like, how this is projected against certain communities and categories of people. And it's a very interesting work, and she calls it homo nationalism, like what Sarah Faris says about feminism, femo nationalism. Just before brings in this concept of homo nationalism, where this whole idea of homosexual rights itself is used to ostracize communities and categories of people. Would say like, they are not a progressive lot because they are so oppressive of homosexual rights. I'm not saying like, that there is no violation of the homosexual rights in some parts of the world, but at the same time, when you use that discourse itself as an oppressive mechanism to talk about communities, it becomes very problematic. And here I want to think about this particular work by there is this particular work by the author Afsane Najmabadi. And this work is quite interesting because the essay that I'm talking about is titled Is Another Language Possible? So here she is trying to say, like, the way in which we universalize rights become very problematic sometimes. And she brings in this question of rights from a different from a different context. She says the way in which we use a language of universalism to address the rights, gender-related rights particularly, that can be very problematic. And she gives the example of Iran, and she says in Iran, for instance, like the early 21st century, if you have been following some of these debates in the West in relation to the rights of homosexuals in Iran, you would have followed a whole lot of discussion on some young men being like, if some young men who underwent public trial, they were like, punished, and capital punishment was there, and these were like, very young boys, and it is quite sad, the situation is. But at the same time, like Najma Badi's argument is, if these question of rights were raised in a particular way, just give me a yeah. So she tries to say, if this question of rights were raised in a particular way, this would have achieved a better kind of, result. And she gives this particular instance where like there was a huge outcry in the West over this public trial that three boys underwent, and they were like boys of 16, 15, around that age group. And this was like, raised as an international issue. A lot of Iranian feminists who fled Iran and went to the US and got asylum there When this happened, so Najma Bazi was saying there were also discussions in Iran about the age of capital punishment. But instead of raising this as a problem of the government's attitude towards homosexuality, if this campaign was led in a different way where they raised the concern regarding these boys, the age group of these boys, probably it would have had a better result, she says. So again, she was not talking about justifying the way in which homosexuality was treated as a crime in the society of Iran, but she was saying that, in certain historical situations, the immediate aim should be to use specific, context specific methods to address issues. And the next year or so, again, Iran passed this law about the capital punishment in the country, where that there's they said that only people who are 18 and over 18 can be given capital punishment. So she says in a year, if that came into being, these three lives could have, they could have saved these three lives if the discourse or around age of capital punishment was brought in the specific historical context. And she also says there are several situations where, the question related to homosexuality is addressed in different ways in societies, in places like Iran. And she talks about people who live together under the guise of friendship, for instance. Unless you kind of announce in public that you are in a homosexual relationship, there are ways in which women live together, men will live together as friends, as people who study in the same institution, work in the same place. Nobody's going to make a big issue out of it. So she says people navigate through difficult historical circumstances, situations in different ways, and these are all variations in language. This whole idea of a universal political right might not be conducive to all societies. It has to be addressed in different ways. From my own personal experience, when I was talking about this whole since Muslim women is one field of inquiry for me, during the triple talaq debate, and even later during the Uniform Civil Code questions came up. My own engagement with the society and with the community, or the conversations I had with Muslim women, they were all trying to say that obviously certain religious practices exist, but then they have all found ways to navigate the system in many ways, and it may not be the way in which modern legal system would envisage, or the way in which they engage with a particular kind of religious situation, a practice, a cultural specificity. It would be different. And maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I also would have borrowed that language of universal rights and would have said, no, no, that's not right. This is not the case. But now, living as a feminist in India for many years, I also realized there are ways in which women navigate this field. It is not one set of there is nothing like a feminist life which is a model. There is no modular form of feminism available for us. It's our own ways in which we all navigate this field in our own. One simple example that I keep giving my students would be clothing that is so particular to feminism at a particular time. Nowadays, it is not again a very important thing. When we grew up as feminists, for instance, anybody who wears a lot of jewelry or wears a very flashy dress. That was not the feminist uniform of the time, but it was slightly different. Like, this is a trivial example that I'm trying to bring up. But then, like, we also had this image in our mind that feminists dress in a particular way. It shouldn't be like, too feminine, but it shouldn't also be like, it shouldn't be flashy, but there is a kind of feminist dress code we all used to think about. But this became very problematic when Muslim women started entering this field of feminism, claiming their rights and trying to say that there is a way in which Muslim women lives feminist life. And here, what happens is this whole idea of clothing and feminism was so, combined, so tied together in our minds. We always used to think that a woman in burqa cannot be a feminist. But now, like, it is constantly challenged by Muslim women. They say we wear burqa because we believe in a particular kind of politics. And this is the way through which we live our belief, our set of values. And this whole idea of, and that is precisely what Saba Mahmood says. Like, there is a very interesting essay that she has written, which is on Taliban and the politics of counterinsurgency. So there she says, for instance, a woman who colors her hair, or a woman who exposes her body, wears a mini skirt, uses a thick lipstick, she's treated as a feminist. We don't have a problem in thinking of her as a feminist. But when you see a woman dressed in burqa because she really believes in a set of values, and she thinks that the embodiment of her belief comes through that clothing, and when you see that woman, you think that she is oppressed, and she's asking, like, this, she's bringing these two sides of our imagination, and she's asking, like, how can one be a feminist imagination? The woman who is like, the woman who clothes in a particular fashion, and how can the other be oppression in the feminist language? So this is where, like, clothing becomes a very problematic category these days to talk about feminism, and a whole lot of other things. I was also referring to this recently. For instance, when we talk about questions, for instance, related to um, um, national categories. The idea of women of India or Indian feminism, do we have that kind of notions existing anymore? Aren't we like so different that we think of ourselves as a plural, heterogeneous society, community, category, group of people, so that the idea of a universal category of people as such do not exist anymore? So how can we say women's rights also can be, or feminism can be, that one singular thing? It does not, it cannot be. So most of the contemporary debates on feminism is about this difference. And to get back to what Janet Haley said, I also want to present a couple of questions that come up there. She was talking in terms of the idea of sexuality debates, and also the question of gender and sexual discrimination. There she says, see, most of the, she also talks in the context of the idea of a university, for instance. We're all like, in academic this thing, we are all familiar with institutions which of that deal with questions related to gender discrimination and all that. But in the Indian context particularly, I also feel, when you think in terms of gender as a category, the overlapping of this category with other categories of class and caste often, like, fail our notice. This has happened a lot when it comes to questions of sexual harassment, for instance. universities or like modern universities, which are also spaces of modern elite knowledge-based communities, we are familiar with certain sets of feminist values, feminist practices, where we know like staring at a woman is bad, or commenting on the clothes of a woman is bad. You cannot pass a judgment on a woman for wearing a particular kind of clothes. But sometimes, especially like in urban modern universities, we take a lot of this for granted. We kind of think that all the students who come there, all the faculty members who come there are aware of this kind of a practice. So this, you put somebody, you naturalize somebody into a situation, you kind of absorb somebody into a situation, assimilate somebody into a kind of cultural environment. This assimilation often fail like a whole lot of people. Um, there are always people who are standing in the margins of these institutions who would not get that kind of cultural familiarization. And often like the ways in which somebody behaves, somebody says something, if you just look at it using the language of, again, the feminist rights, sometimes it can be very problematic because it also comes at the cost of like, I'm not saying that's always the case, but there should always be a concern about a person's location, what a person is familiar with, how long a person have been living here, what is this person's access to the modern registers of feminism. Because feminism can be a tool that would marginalize people, that would um, scare people away from the center many times. I have seen that personally. So that's why I'm saying, like, to be a feminist also means to be fashionable. But at the same time, there are people who do not have access to this language, this fashionable language of feminism. And it is important. It is like Lefebvre says, the right to the city. People should have that right to feminism, in the sense to be part of that feminist discourse, to be familiar with that feminist discourse and familiarizing them. We shouldn't use feminism as a yardstick to marginalize people. Rather, we should use it as a set of values that you need slowly, like, you need to culturize people into that set of values. Bell Hooks talks about this in this work. There is a very interesting work by Bell Hooks. It's called Passionate Politics. It's called Passionate Politics, and there is a second part to the title. I cannot think of it now, but you can look up. So Bell Hooks says, she talks about a feminist classroom and how she teaches the course on feminism. So she says a lot of Black men register for her course, and she says it's not just about teaching feminism, it is also about familiarizing people to the concept of feminism. That is very important. That's why I say, like, you cannot just teach feminism as an academic practice. It is also a way of life. It's a way of thinking. And to bring in that feminist consciousness, it takes a lot of time. You cannot say, okay, this group is uncivilized. They are not feminists. This whole idea of, like, okay, those men beat up their wives, they are like backward. These men are like, so, but then we also have seen how men who think of themselves as forward, modern, elite, all that, and the ways in which they expose themselves as like prejudiced and, as hypocrites. So that is also there on the other end. So the idea of targeting communities using the concept of feminism, that can be very problematic, I'm saying, because everything that we do, everything we practice as a community, everything that we come across in our day-to-day lives, they are political choices. And just because this is like, again, going back to what Arundhati Roy said when she was talking about the Delhi rape. She says it was like, all this candle light vigil and this whole uproar against rape. She was saying it was just an unusual protest against an extraordinary response to an ordinary event. And she was saying she is sad to say that, because in India, a lot of rapes happen every day. But when it happens to a middle class girl, and when the criminals fit into our idea of the criminal poor, we make this huge hue and cry. But when it happens in a different context, and when the criminals are from a different category, this kind of a response will not come. This was a very shocking kind of statement she made, because this was a very sad situation. We are like, the and in spite of that, if she was forced to say this, we should also think in terms of the historicity of that statement, think in terms of how our own locations, our own idea of caste and class and communities sometimes determine our response to historical events. We don't like respond to uh, different events of the same kind in the same way if they belong to different categories, or like, if they come from different kind of social contexts, which I thought made sense at that point. And I was also thinking in terms of, so basically what I'm trying to say is, or like, I'm just trying to present a set of concerns that come up, not against feminism, but which problematizes the idea of feminism. Where, like, for instance, when Arundhati Roy says the idea of criminal poor and the way in which we imagine rape or think about rape, it is like, in some ways intertwined with our idea of response to a particular incident of rape. Then that makes the terrain of feminism murky, right? I also remember, and this I referred to in the introduction of my book also, when a lot of, as a response to the Delhi rape, there was a time when there were lots of these midnight marches of women. In Kerala, we call it Ratri Sondamakal. So this, like, the idea of accessing the night. And when that was happening, a group called Dalit Camera, what they did was they went and interviewed women in the streets at night. And on one side, you have this middle class candlelight march happening, talking about women's rights as a kind of universal category. But on the other end, like, they went and interviewed women who were sweeping the streets at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And these women, like, they come at midnight and they sweep the streets before, like, early morning. By 6, they are, like, off the streets. And another category of women would be the sex workers who are in the street around, like, midnight. And for them, there is no idea of this whole, the taking back the night, because this is the time that they work. And night is also, like, tied to their idea of work. So sex work and night are in some ways combined in a very different kind of historic, and they don't think in terms of safety, security, and all that. And the same, like, so they gave the mic to these women who were sweeping the street and asked them, don't you think you are not safe at night? And they said, this is our work time and what else can we do? So the idea of like on one side, as a middle class agenda, we think about going out at night but there are categories of women who go out around the same time and work. And even the question of safety is not even their concern because that's the only time they can work. So these kind of difficult historical situations, the uneven terrain of value system, that is what I was talking about in terms of feminist rights. So historically, like we are brought up in a particular way to think about women's rights in a particular way. But at the same time, rights mean different things for different categories of people. And rights are not distributed evenly when it comes to people of different categories. And unless we take into consideration these differences, it's very difficult to think of feminism as a unified set of values. There is no one way of living the feminist life. Probably I'll stop here and take questions, and then will that be okay, Koel?
Yeah, ma'am. No problem. So whoever has question can ask ma'am now, or you can just type your question on the chat box. Anyone? Feel free to talk to ma'am. If you have no question, you can just talk to ma'am about this topic.
Hello, ma'am. I have a question for you. So, your
Saraswati
book,
ma'am, please.
Gendering Minorities, Muslim Women and Politics of Modernity, addresses critical issues facing Muslim women. So, what motivated you to write this book? I would like to know. And what impact do you hope it will have?
Yes, that's a difficult question. What motivated me primarily, the idea was to work in an area that I can contribute something to, that I have access to. I was brought up in a Muslim household in southern Kerala, and I really thought, and all through my life, I was like, in kind of a conflict with the idea of religion. I had never been a practicing, Muslim. Even now I'm not. But the thing is, um, the idea of community was more than the question of religion. All the time, this question used to come up, like, because in college, all the time, I was told that you don't look like a Muslim. Uh, that would be the first thing. Like during our times, we never used to talk about religion, caste, and all in the uh, college context. But still, like growing up in Trivandrum, a lot of people used to say your name is not a Muslim name. You don't look like a Muslim. And suddenly, like I had a very problematic relationship with my own identity. I suddenly didn't know what I was because obviously I live kind of, or I'm living a secular life throughout my life. So what is my community identity? But at the same time, like, I also felt the question of being a Muslim comes up whenever I try to make a particular kind of intervention. So this idea of Muslim woman is not just about a religious identity in India, it's also a minority identity. So the question of minority is a political identity in India. And so the question of one's identity keeps coming up all the time when you try to engage as a feminist. And the thing is, like, when I was told that you don't look like a Muslim, it was given as a compliment. Okay. A lot of my very liberated, progressive friends thought that it was a compliment to say, you don't look like a Muslim, which was all the more shocking for me because it was not even a choice for me. So that way, like, probably that was my first, uh, the entry point into this whole question of Muslim women. But at the same time, further, like, when I started working in the field, a lot of other things were happening. Post-secularism itself was coming up in big way to think in terms of, to problematize the question of universal rights and the idea of secular societies, the construction of Christian values into the larger frame of modern nation state in the West, Talal Asad's work, and Charles Hishkin, Saba Mahmood. So there was this whole intellectual thing happening, and postmodernism also like, quite a big thing. So the idea of heterogeneity, the idea of parallel, plural values, that was already there. So probably that is where I thought writing or like, working on this field was important, because from the Indian context, we didn't have many works that would think in terms of Muslim women as a feminist identity. There are lots of works, there were lots of works in terms of like, Muslim women as a lot of work on Muslim women were related to the question of uniform civil code, or related to the legal questions, personal law and uniform civil code. One thing. Another thing, Muslim women and the backward situation due to the religious oppression, marginality, lack of education. These were lots of concerns. Other than that, as a feminist practice, how Muslim women live their lives, that was not investigated in the Indian context. And that's why, like, I started thinking about it as an intellectual field, and I felt it was important to work. But as I like, now, like when I look at, especially from Kerala itself, there are lots of younger scholars who are working in the field, and I'm quite happy that it's happening now. Yeah. I think I answered, or I attempted to answer it.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your reply. We have some chats in the chat box. Cole, would you like
Yeah,
to ask them on their
sure.
behalf?
Yeah, Rishati, thank you for letting me know, and thank you for the question to ma'am. Ma'am, there is a question from Abhirami that, ma'am, could you please give some recommendation of literary fiction as well as non-fiction and articles to read more about contemporary feminism?
Actually, feminism is a large category again, but maybe some of these people whom I mentioned, you can look up for work by Saba Mahmood, Sarah Faris, Sarah Ahmed, How to Live, Living a Feminist Life. It's a very interesting work. Jaspir Puar. I also would ask you to read some of the, like, recent questions about intersectionality and all that coming up. As a basic text, maybe you can look up Nivedha Menon's work. Then yeah, so there's no one set of readings, but like, you can just look up at a field and then think about what are the questions surrounding that. So some of these are contemporary post-feminist readings, which I mentioned. And literary work, again, it depends on the context, right? For instance, like now, a lot of people are reading on women from the Arab world. Then this entire set of fiction produced by immigrant Iranian writers in the US. Um, so I think again, like, there is no one set of women's writing. Depends on the field of your inquiry. For instance, like I would say you start reading our own Malayalam writers who are um, Meera or Meera's work is like, very interesting if you are interested in reading contemporary feminist fiction. I would say Arachar is one of those best works that has come up in Malayalam literature. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope she got her answer. And next question is, do you think this feminism reach its peak in future or it fades than today? This is a challenging question actually.
Can you repeat? I didn't hear
Actually,
you.
ma'am, she's asking
Oh.
that as feminism reach its peak in future or it fades in than today. I mean,
Yeah,
this
so
is my
that's
point.
what I was saying. Feminism is not one thing. It is so many other things, and it has become very. I have been trying to say that it has become a very powerful discourse, and feminism can also be used to marginalize people in contemporary world. So one way for feminism to survive is to be aware of its own power. That's why, like, when I began, I said, like, we keep asking the question, where is the woman in this group? Or as a feminist group, as a women's group, as a woman's representative, you can walk in anywhere and everywhere and ask this question. So one way for feminism to survive is to be aware of its own power, as Janet Halley would say.
One person talked about what do you think about ecofeminism?
I don't know, like, because ecofeminism, sometimes I used to think of it as a very problematic category because this whole idea of thinking about nature, mother, and like, the idea of equating women with nature. Those kind of earlier conceptualizations of ecofeminism, I used to think it is very stereotypical and problematic. But nowadays, like, there are ways in which environmental questions are related to feminist concerns. For instance, women take up the questions related to nature and environment in a different way. The way they navigate a terrain is entirely different from the exploitative vocabulary of or exploitative uh, way in which men think in terms of their relationship with nature. So I have students who are working in the Northeast and like, um, uh, areas, regions close to the forest, who tries to say there is a way in which women have brought up a culture or like, nourished a culture in which, nature and human beings live, have a better coexistence. So looking at those kind of moments or like women's activism and the idea of nature, that might work rather than like this confining to a kind of stereotypical idea of women and nature, as though women equates themselves with nature. Those kind of things, I feel it's a bit um, problematic.
One more question is there. How do you think feminism adapts to queer identities in the Indian context?
Uh, so yeah, so this is like, when I was trying to talk about this whole idea of homo nationalism, this is what I meant. In now when you think in terms of queer studies, it is an altogether different field. Even though the question of homosexuality and rights and all came up in the context of feminism, or they kind of were allied movements. Right now, queer politics has set a totally different field for itself, where they feel that they don't have to work with feminism. So in the Indian context also, if you think about contemporary queer movements and queer politics, they are like, they have kind of moved away from, not, I wouldn't say moved away as in like they are in opposition with feminism, but at the same time, it is a like discourse on its own. which makes sense also, I feel, because somewhere in the second wave feminism, like if you think about radical feminism, and women were talking in terms of bodies and reworking on women's bodies. And then there used to be this idea of lesbianism as a resistance to patriarchy. You think about Deepa Mehta's Fire. It has been critiqued a lot for bringing up the question of lesbian sexuality as a response to patriarchy. But nowadays, like the queer movement also asserts its own existence as a different category altogether, as a different discourse altogether. It doesn't have to rely on feminism that way, I think. And uh, it's not that, like, feminists cannot be part of the queer politics, or people who are part of the queer politics cannot be feminists. Definitely there are overlappings, but at the same time, it is also good to think in terms of political rights separately, especially when you are pushing for the legal rights and all. It is good to take it up as a movement on its own.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the last question is, can we reduce the rate of violence against women by inculcating feminist values in our education system? What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think that has to be done in a systematic way. So there is this gender textbook which actually came up through the initiative of Feminists at Anveshi Research Center, Hyderabad. And in Telangana, it was part of the curriculum for a long time. And now there is a Malayalam translation of this, has come up in Kerala. Chinda has published it, and that is a very important book. And if such books become part of higher secondary education and all that, I think that will definitely help, because to have an egalitarian society, the best way is to introduce the values to children. But at the same time, not just through schools, you should also have that in your home, because that's where kids learn. Not just through your textbook, but the way in which you practice things at home, making and all the time, like, we keep saying women should do this, women should do that. I have a feeling maybe men should get that kind of an education. When we bring up boys at home, we should tell them they are not superior, or, like, they should um, have equal share in doing things at home. They should learn how to cook. They should learn to clean their mess. We shouldn't allow boys to leave their dishes on the table and get up and go and make. And the way they talk to women, I think that education can happen at home also. For that, parents also should have that kind of value system. You cannot have a father who sits in the a living room, read the newspaper, and ask the mother to come and cook for him, and then expect the child to pick up feminist values. It won't happen that way. And it should, like, the way in which we kind of bring in a gendered nature in terms of who does this work, who does that work, that becomes very problematic. Where, like, you say women should not cook, or men should not wash dishes, or men should not do this, men should not do that, women should be doing this. So this kind of gendered upbringing is what creates the problem. Education can change, but I think education is not just about school education. It should happen at home as
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your elaborating explanation on
Ma'am,
every. Uh, yeah, please speak, Sneha.
hi. I need to ask a question. Ma'am, your sessions are very informative. My question is, can you hear me, ma'am?
yes, tell me.
Okay.
I
Ma'am,
didn't get
how
your
would
name.
Sneha?
Okay.
Ma'am, how would you condense or what do you think is the phase or wave that this feminism movement has become now? Like the feminism movement has, gone through different phases or waves, right? So right now, what kind of phase is feminism in?
Um, for instance, like post-feminism is a term a lot of people use. I don't know whether the feminist moment is over or the feminist historical moment is over, but I would want to think of this as a time when we are rethinking feminism in different ways because the whole idea of feminism as a category of modern rights, we are also revisiting modernity, problematizing modernity in our own ways. We know that a lot of things that we think of as rights in the modern context may not translate or transpose as rights to a lot of people. So, in that sense, it has become very problematic to say we are talking about women's rights. Then the question would be, oh, who are these women? Like, is there one set of women that we are talking about? Is there even a question like, and what a woman think of as right could be oppression for another woman? So we are living in a society where differences matter a lot and differences determine our day-to-day life. Like our everyday life is not as a collective. I don't know. In modernity, that is one problem that with modern rights, the concept of rights in modernity, we think of collective rights. But most often, we don't navigate our lives as a collective. We navigate our lives as individuals. We are interconnected, but at the same time, like the everyday life is not something that talks about collective rights. So those differences matter a lot. And I feel that idea of feminism as a category of modern rights is over. Like now we are more thinking in terms of differences. We are thinking more in terms of like the problem within feminism. There's a term called governance feminism. Again, Janet Haley and others have associated with it, where they're talking about feminism, which is only talking in terms of legal rights and governance and all that. But then that's not the way in which ordinary women navigate their life, right? Um, and that's what I'm saying. Like, for instance, the woman who wants to wear a particular clothes might have her own way of wearing that cloth when she's not being like controlled by, or for instance, like there is a restriction in your family, you kind of find your own way of doing it in some situations, like you hide your clothes, you go out, you change, like the for instance the hostel insists girls should not wear this kind of the clothes. What will the girls do? They just hide their clothes in their bag and they go to a mall or something, they change, they just hang out, and then when they come back they get back to the set of clothes acceptable there. Those are also like women, and these are not given to you through any legal mechanism, right? The way in which somebody hides a cloth in her bag and goes and changes in a place and then wear it according to her likes and dislikes and get back. These are not like legally given rights, but these are ways through which people navigate their lives through difficult historical situations. And this has happened all the time. And so, taking into, so rather than using the language of universal rights, there are certain ways in which people navigate in everyday, through everyday situations. I think that comprises feminist values as well. And therefore, uh, yeah, so I would say that idea of feminism as a category of political rights for women as one set of values, that is gone. That time is gone. Now, like feminism is also about acknowledging differences, different aspirations, how women live their life differently.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else want to ask anything? So, with your permission, ma'am, I want to give you a vote of thanks. So, good evening once again to everyone. We have just had the privilege of listening to a truly illuminating and thought-provoking address by Dr. Sherin B.S. on the topic of contemporary feminist politics, interventions, and counter-discourses. Dr. Sherin, with her profound insight and eloquent delivery, has shed light on the complex and multifaceted nature of feminist struggle in our contemporary world. Her exploration of the interplay between feminism, nationalism, and religion has been particularly insightful. Dr. Serin's work on Muslim women and the politics of modernity is groundbreaking, and her contribution to the field of gender studies are invaluable. We are immensely grateful to Dr. Sherin ma'am for sharing her expertise and inspiring us to think critically about the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for feminist movements. Let us express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Sherin B.S. for her enlightening talk. Thank you, ma'am, once again. Now, I would like to thank with all sincerity Dr. Kalyani Valat ma'am for her unwavering support and dedication to fostering a love for literature and empowering students like us, and Mr. Anand Haridas sir for his guidance and encouragement that made a significant impact on the Cultural Studies Research Forum and its mission to promote critical thinking and creative expression. I would also like to express my thanks to all the attendees who contributed to the success of this event. Stay tuned for our next captivating session in the month of September. Until we meet again, continue to explore and learn with Valat. Thank you, one and all. So, ma'am, can we just end the session?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.